anyway, I was born and raised in Bucks County in Warminster. I grew up in a family that wasn't the Brady Bunch, but it was the all-American family. No problems, no trauma, no abuse, just a normal childhood. So when I became a teenager, as most teenagers are, I was very rebellious. I didn't want to listen to my parents. They didn't know anything. And I met a young man when I was 16 years old, and we started dating, and I just could not wait to get out of my house for no reason other than I was a teenager and I thought I knew everything. So when I was 18 years old, his family moved to Florida. So we decided that we would live together, or, he wanted to go to Florida too, and I said, well, I'm not going to Florida unless we get married. So we did. And we moved to Florida, 1,200 miles away from my family and friends, which was my first big mistake. At the time, he was a nice guy. I loved him dearly. He was a wonderful guy. He was funny, and we had a lot in common. So anyway, we get to Florida. We lived at that time where we lived on the West Coast. There was no stores within 10 miles of anything. We were very isolated. It was mainly retired people. So I moved to a place trying to find a job, trying to move on and start my life, and we could not find jobs. So I think I ended up working as a cocktail waitress in a bar, in a bowling alley for a while. So again, we were isolated. Before long, my first child, actually exactly 9 months later, my first child, Alan, was born. And I was just thrilled. That was my whole goal in my whole life, was to get married, have children, and have a family. That's all I ever wanted. So he was born, and he was just the delight of my life. A few years later, I guess about 4 years later, my second child arrived. He was 6 weeks early. He was premature, so we had a little bit of struggle with that. But what was also going on is my husband started drinking, and at first he was hiding it, and I didn't realize how bad it was. So he had been in and out of rehab constantly, and I can remember a couple times picking him up from the rehab center, and he'd say, can we stop at the store and get cigarettes? And I would wait in the car, and he'd come out, and we'd get home, and here he had beer that he just bought and was hiding under the seat, and I was completely oblivious to it. But anyway, the drinking progressed, and eventually he became abusive. So mostly it was because he couldn't control anything. He couldn't, to be honest, I don't know what it was, but he just wanted to be in control of everything, and he started drinking. He started getting abusive. There were a few times where he punched me in the eye. I had black eyes. He would pull my hair. And at this point I wasn't working, and he would sporadically have a job, but he would come home Friday after being paid, and he had spent all of his money on cocaine or alcohol or whatever, and I'm waiting at home desperate to have some money to buy groceries and feed my kids, and by the time he got home it was gone. So constantly we were fighting, and his sister used to tell me, you're aggravating him. Well, God, we needed to eat. I'm sorry I was aggravating him, but anyway, so it was getting bad. And at one point, I started to go to school, and I thought, well, things will work out. So I remember coming home from school one time and taking care of my son, who was still a baby, in the crib, and thought something was funny, and I looked at the bed, and the bumper pad was backwards, and here I looked at the other end of the crib, and there was a hole punched into the side of the crib. And I thought, well, you know what, it's time. I can't live like this. And again, I was isolated. I had no friends. I had no family, and I was too embarrassed to let my own family know what was going on. So I guess I was biding my time, trying to go through school, and at one point I came home. I was sitting on a chair, and he came home from another drinking binge and looked at me and said, "Get out of my chair." I was like, whatever. And he pulled out a gun and held the gun to my head and told me to get the hell out of his chair. So the next day, or actually that evening, I finally called my parents and talked to my mother and said, please, I have to get out of here. So within 24 hours, my 2 brothers and my mother were on their way driving to Florida. And at that point, he grabbed my oldest son and took off to his father's house. So while I was waiting for my parents to come, I'm like, well, I like to take Alan out for ice cream. And I would come over and I'd take him and then I'd drop him back off again. So once my family got there, we loaded everything up in the car and went over to pretending I was just taking my son out to ice cream, and I grabbed him and threw him in the car, and we took off, and he chased us down the street with a gun in his hand. Thank God he didn't pull the trigger and didn't do anything, but we got on the road immediately and never looked back. So I came back here, back to Pennsylvania, got a job immediately, enrolled back in school, started working on trying to make sure my kids didn't follow in his footsteps. I was going to make sure I could take care of my kids, and I knew I couldn't depend on him to help. So immediately he started calling constantly every single day. He would harass me, he would call, he would beg me to come back, he'd write me these long, drawn out letters. I'm sure you've heard all this before. I'm so sorry, and this won't happen again. But like I said, I was done. So one day I did get a job. I was working full time, and I was at work, and again he was calling me. He was harassing me, telling me he was going to kill himself. He couldn't deal with this anymore. My life is over. I have nobody. I have nothing. I don't have my family anymore. And I kept hanging up on it. Just stop bothering me. I'm at work. And this one time I knew he was serious. So I hung up the phone. I called the police down there because I didn't know where the mental health center was at the time, and told them that I was concerned and could somebody go over there. And again, he called me back, and I answered, and I heard the gunshots. So he shot himself in the chest. I think they say he missed his heart by inches. And he went to the hospital, and ironically, and I still can't figure out how this happened, he stayed in the hospital for 2 days. They released him and gave him his gun back. So anyway, I tried to be nice to him, and what would happen is if I was nice to him, he would read things into it. Oh my God, she wants to be back with me. And so I became this raging, horrible person, because the only way I could get him to understand it was over was to just be mean to him. And that felt horrible and unnatural for me. So eventually he decided that he was going to come up here. And he did. He started following me. He would follow me to school. I used to have to be escorted out from Temple out to the parking lot with the security guard. He followed me. He would show up in the store wherever I was shopping. And again, I tried really hard to help him. I tried to get him into treatment. He, at one point, begged me to help him get help. And I can remember driving him up 611 to the crisis center when he tried to grab the steering wheel of my car because he changed his mind. And I was able to deflect him. And this was my very first contact with the crisis center. And I don't even know if it was called the crisis center back then. But so we get to the hospital, and because I didn't let him grab the steering wheel, they couldn't 302 him at the time. They couldn't do anything, and he wasn't going in the hospital. So this went on for a really long time. I moved out of my parents' house. I got an apartment of my own. I was working, and I was trying to get my kids into treatment and because they had been traumatized so bad. And again, he just kept stalking me, and he would break into my apartment. My brother put security bars on there. And did you ever hear of an Allen wrench? They're those little, well, my brother gave me a really gigantic one, and my ex-husband's name was Alan. So it was gigantic, and I kept it on my bed. I'm like, what am I going to do with it? I could never, I don't, this is not going to help me. I'll be too afraid to use it, but I still kept it there. But he kept breaking in, and at one point in front of the kids, he broke in and grabbed a hold of my hair and dragged me outside, and he ripped handfuls of my hair out. And so that, I called the police. I think it might have been a woman's place back then, I don't remember, but I had help going to get a protection from abuse order from him. So at the hearing, the judge told him, it was a long time ago, so I'm not sure if he ordered him, but he said, if you go back to Florida, back to your family, we will drop charges and we'll be over with. So he did. So somehow, through all this chaos, I got my kids into treatment. I just started taking them. They had been traumatized just like I had, and started getting them into treatment. And I kept being told, this is your fault. It was awful. It was, if you don't know how to parent him, maybe you should give him to somebody that can. So when he started school, the phone calls immediately started. The teacher was saying that he was walking around chainsawing kids with his finger, trying to kiss the girls, which, at the time I thought was cute, but he was just disruptive. And so, again, we took him to counseling, and I was told he's trying to, if you can't take care of him, we'll find somebody that can. You caused all this by staying as long as you did, and all kinds of things. And as a parent, I don't know how many of you are parents or family members of somebody that may be struggling. There's nothing worse feeling to think that you caused any harm to your kid. And, if they have a hangnail or they fall and they get hurt when you weren't looking, you feel horrible, you feel guilty. So this was just more guilt thrown on to me and making me feel horrible about how things turned out. But I persisted, and I just kept thinking to myself, there's no way that I could cause that, what was going on with my kids, and my ex-husband, and his mother, and his brother, and his entire family. There's no way. I'm not that powerful that I could do that. So I just kept plugging along and demanding to get treatment for him. And finally, and not that this is a good thing, we had an answer. That at first they were telling me my son had ADHD. When he was 12 years old, he was hospitalized for the first time, and he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And for those of you that don't know, mental illness is often genetic. So what we later found out is my ex-husband also had schizophrenia, and when he was drinking, he was exasperating the whole thing. So then my other son also was causing all kinds of problems. He ended up in the hospital. When he became a teenager, he became very rebellious, and he decided he was going to Florida to live with his father. And he did. And at the time, he was doing well. They were doing great. And within 6 months, hell broke loose again. So he decided that he was coming home. And on the way home, his father called him and said, I have absolutely nothing now. I'm done. So he came back, and I guess probably a couple weeks later, he called me and said he wants to come up here. He wants me to find him help. And I said, I'll find you help down there. Please don't come back up here. And within 24 hours, he died. He drank himself to death. So to look back at all the things that happened in my life and back at that time, he was struggling with the mental illness the whole time. And probably in my heart, I knew that. I just didn't know how to help him or what to do to help him. And I didn't want him to be in jail. I didn't want him to have to go to jail. I wanted him to get help. And I knew there was a time in his life where he was a wonderful guy. And there was many times, even when he was drinking, when he wasn't drunk, and that he was a nice guy, he was a good person, and he could be something. And even today, I mourn what he lost. I feel horrible for what he lost. He lost his wife, he lost his children, he lost everything, and he never got it back. So anyway, somehow in all that chaos, I met this wonderful man who is right there in the center. And this is my ex-husband and me and my mother at Epcot. And then this is my two boys. But I met this wonderful guy here in the middle, and I don't know how he put up with all of it. I really don't know. But all I can say is he must really love me because he's still here. So we've been married 25 years. We have a daughter together, the one that's in the front there. But we have two kids that struggle with mental illness now. And it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of of heartbreak, and it's a lot of roller coaster rides, and it's a lot of stress. But we do what we can because we care about them and they're good kids. And I think my goal in life has always been that no matter what happens to me or with his father, I was not going to allow either one of them to struggle and to go down that same path as their father. So, anyway, we've been married 25 years, and I have to say, I came to NAMI because I needed to give back, and I needed to find people that understood and that got it and could, that I could help others that were in the same shoes that I was in at one point. So, any questions? I do have to add something. I'm sorry, and I forgot this. I just write it down. PTSD. I like I said, I didn't have the mental illness, but after all of these years, I'm sorry, I forgot to say this, but after all these years, and I think it's been, my son's 32 years old. It was 31 years ago that I came back from Florida. I still have nightmares. Still to this day, I have nightmares, and they're always exactly the same nightmare. And I wake up, and it's awful. And I may not have some of the PTSD that a lot of the people that you work with do. Maybe at the time I did. I don't remember. Maybe 10 years from now it'll all come out. I don't know. But I have nightmares every single day. And there's just some things once in a while that trigger it, and I think, oh my God. So anyway.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
Okay, so just a disclosure, what I'm talking about is something that I live with. I've been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, and I'll talk to you about that after the break, more about my story. But raise your hand if you've got mental health. So everybody should raise their hand. Everybody has mental health.
It may be good or bad, but I got it.
Right. So what is mental health? So it refers to our cognitive, behavioral, and emotional well-being, and it's everything about how we think, feel, and behave. And the term mental health, which is why some of you didn't raise your hand, is commonly used to mean an absence of a mental disorder. And the correlation between mental health and mental illness, some people hear that and they think, do you have mental health? No. And I've even heard some people say that mental illness, I've never heard of that. What is it? I'm fortunate enough not to have that in my family. Well, it's more common than we think. What is mental illness? It is a condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, or mood. And such conditions may affect someone's ability to relate to others and function every day. So it's your entire life. And each person will have different experiences, even people with the same diagnosis. I have met other people with schizoaffective disorder, and we are nothing alike. We take the same medication, and we are nothing alike. Our symptoms are nothing alike. I mean, people have told me that I'm high functioning or whatever, but it's a spectrum, and everyone is different. Everyone's mental illness will be different. Everyone's recovery will be different. Everyone's symptoms will be different. But recovery is possible, especially when treatment is received early. So a mental health condition isn't the result of one event, and we'll use mental illness and mental health condition interchangeably. As a person living with a mental illness, I definitely prefer the term mental health condition. Genetics, environment, and lifestyle influence whether someone develops a mental health condition. What also influences that is something like a stressful job or home life, traumatic life events, being the victim of a crime or abuse. And it's not, abuse doesn't necessarily cause it, but it can exacerbate it or bring it out in somebody more quickly. Biochemical processes are also involved, circuitry in the brain and brain structure itself. So people living with a disorder like I have, schizoaffective disorder, we actually lose brain matter as a result of the illness. The prevalence of it is that 1 in 4 adults every single year will experience a mental health condition, and 1 in 5 youth. 1 in 17 lives with a serious mental illness, such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And schizoaffective disorder is just in the family of schizophrenia. The only difference being that with the diagnostic criteria, the symptoms, a mood disorder has to be present for the majority of the time. So in addition to me being affected by a mental illness, say, everyone around me is affected by it. So we have a banner that we bring, and it says everyone knows someone, because almost everyone has been affected by it. And you've heard from Debbie's story what she could have used when she was going through all this, and that's why our mission is what it is, improving lives through education. So it's important to know what's going on. Advocacy, because you need someone in your corner, because not everyone understands it. So we are here to help people understand it, because change is difficult, but it's a little bit easier when you've got someone who knows what they're talking about, fighting for change. And support, because it's crucial. Feeling like you're alone is a horrible feeling. Half of all mental health conditions begin by age 14, and 75% by age 24. The normal personality and behavior changes of adolescence mask that sometimes. And early engagement and support are critical to improving outcomes and increasing promises of recovery. So, what is psychosis? Psychosis is a symptom. It is not an illness. And not all psychosis is schizophrenia or something like I have schizoaffective disorder. Psychosis is more common than you may think. 100,000 young people, just for example, experience psychosis in a year, and as many as 3 in 100 people will have an episode at some point in their life. So first episode psychosis, early psychosis, so any psychosis doesn't really come on suddenly or immediately. So a victim of abuse may not that very moment experience a psychosis, but it can happen gradually. So usually, like I said, it's gradually, and it's a change in thoughts and perceptions, and it usually comes in cognitive disorientation, like I have no idea what's going on, or it's difficult to process things. And psychosis itself is a range of symptoms, but usually involves either hallucinations, so hearing voices, auditory hallucinations, strange sensations, or unexplainable feelings, like bugs under the skin, things like that, and seeing glimpses of objects in the periphery. And they're not there. That's important. So if you see a flash of something and it, it may not be psychosis. But so delusions are just strong beliefs that they're not consistent with reality or what's going on in your environment around you, or the culture. Different beliefs play a role in what psychosis is for different people. They're not true, and they may seem irrational to other people. And I have a video of an example of active psychosis for you that's pretty accurate to something that I've experienced. So that could involve believing external forces are controlling your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, believing that other people's trivial remarks are about you, that events or objects or things taking place pertain directly to you, or that you can control those things. Thinking that you have special powers, which you'll see in my story, NAMI Man, he does have special powers. He crushes stigma. So that's not psychosis. And sometimes, and I have seen this, people believe that they're on a special mission, or that they are acting on direct orders from God, or that they are God. So, symptoms that you can look for when someone comes in and you're not sure if, as a result of abuse, they're experiencing a psychosis. So withdrawal from family and friends and social networks, difficulty sleeping, difficulty reading or comprehending what someone is saying, and a lot of these are symptoms of mental illness in general. Seeing shadows or flashes of light, hearing ringing or voices.
I didn't hear a thing. I didn't hear anything.
It wasn't just me. It wasn't just me.
Perfect time.
That was like totally perfect because I needed a drink anyway. So smelling or tasting things that others can't. I was worried that this might be heavy and sad, so I'm glad that suspiciousness or uneasiness with others, a decline in self-care or personal hygiene. And from personal experience, it's not the desire to not be presentable. It's just the absolute inability because you've got so much going on in your head, you can't do it. And you know what you look like. Strong, inappropriate emotions or having no emotions at all or a flat affect. So if something major happened to somebody, so say abuse, and they come in and they are totally just disconnected and detached and cannot express emotion, maybe a sign or a symptom. So the criminalization of mental illness. So my little remark in the beginning is important because the Bucks County Correctional Facility is Bucks County's largest mental health facility, technically. So public psychiatric beds available in Pennsylvania. So a minimum of 50 beds per 100,000 people is considered adequate, necessary. So in Pennsylvania, we have 10.4 beds per 100,000 people. And like every state in the nation, we incarcerate more individuals with mental illness than we treat, than we hospitalize. So the total inmate population, this is as of 2005, and everybody has a handout, and it's the full assessment. It looks like this. So these are the statistics, and this is from the Treatment Advocacy Center. So the estimated population of seriously mentally ill inmates out of that 75,000 is 12,081. And the total psychiatric inpatient population from 2004 was 6,128. So that makes the likelihood of incarceration versus hospitalization 2 to 1. And you can have a change, you can have an impact on this. How we deal with it, what we know, working with empathy and understanding changes that. Advocating for people who you come across, who you're helping, making sure that you know that programs like CIT exist rather than just calling 911. There was a video that I wanted to include in this where a gentleman was experiencing a psychotic episode, and in order to deal with that, to cope with it, he was drinking and he was heavily intoxicated and he was in public and he was begging to be arrested. And the police officers weren't trained in CIT and they couldn't find a way to help get him the help that he needed because he wasn't saying, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to kill someone else. And so he was arrested and put into jail for public intoxication. So it's unfortunate and it doesn't need to happen, and when we all work together, it doesn't have to. So if you ever come across a situation and you don't know what to do, that key tag is there, you call us, whatever you need. So an important topic to discuss with mental health and mental illness is stigma. So stigma defined is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. And what is the result of stigma? So about 40% of the 60 million patients suffering from a mental illness go without treatment. In youth, it's even higher than that. It's 56%. Perceived stigma is a barrier. It's a huge barrier, especially with medication and hospitalization. And other barriers are lack of knowledge. So NAMI educates about mental health care, inability to recognize symptoms in oneself, and an inability to identify adequate healthcare resources from our mental health system. So people just have no idea where to go. And the last contact that they have had with a mental health facility or mental illness in general is what they see on TV or in the movies. and it's scary, and we're grossly misrepresented. So, some more stigma. So, stigmatizing terms and person-first language. So, crazy, lunatic, insane, they can all be replaced by a person experiencing symptoms of mental illness. So, mentally ill. NAMI's name used to be the Alliance for the Mentally Ill, and we changed it to first-person language. And so the person-first language for mentally ill is a person living with a mental illness. Schizophrenic. So I am not schizoaffective. I am a person living with schizoaffective disorder. A consumer. I never ever want to be referred to as a consumer. I am a person receiving services. Patient, if you don't have to, if you're discussing something with a client or whatever person or individual. And brain disorder or brain disease, mental health condition. It's scary in these terms. And at NAMI, one of our principles is we see the person, not the illness. With that, I'm going to actually advance to Christine's part.
Oh,
And she, because despite your best efforts, something always gets messed up. So I'm going to go to Christine, who's next in the agenda.
So I'm Christine. My last name is Silivertis. You'll never be able to pronounce it, so don't worry. And in all, full disclosure as well, I survive with PTSD. I've had it, I guess it started when I was in 8th grade. And I give a speech for One Woman's Hope about my PTSD and how I survive with that every day. So, and I'll go into a little bit about that as we talk. Survivors of abuse. There is PTSD obviously involved in that, but that also gets clouded with borderline personality disorder. A lot of the symptoms can be clouded, and with PTSD, there's also anxiety, depression, and substance abuse as well. So, post-traumatic stress disorder. How many of you have had individuals that have come in with that? Or you thought they have had it at least? Okay, good. How many of you have had anyone in your family or a friend? Various person. Good. So, and I'm going to give you my own personal experience on this as well. Flashbacks. I live with flashbacks every day. Every day. I can see a car, I can see a person, and those flashbacks come back. I can just drive through an area and they come back. It's something that we live with every day when you have PTSD. A smell, a food, a restaurant, a song on the radio can bring these back. Avoidance. This is another symptom. I don't drive down certain streets. If the song comes on the radio, I change the channel. If a movie comes on, I change the channel. Avoidance is a huge thing. For many, many years, I did not get involved in relationships. I would get so far in, and then I would disappear. Completely disappear. No reason, just because it was too close. Cognitive mood symptoms. So being negative, worried, fear. Fear is there at all times. The minute you wake up, every hour of the day, till the minute you go to bed. Sleep for me is the safest spot because your brain isn't working. It doesn't have to think. Fear is everywhere for someone with PTSD. There are different, obviously, levels of this. When you're first coming out of an event, an abusive situation, you may not even know you're living in fear because you're just trying to survive at that point. Once you have some space between you and the abuse, you can kind of identify the fear and what you're afraid of, but that takes years. So as the caretaker of someone who has PTSD or the first responder or the clinician or the volunteer, it's very important to understand that fear is something they live with at all times. And we're going to go over some ways that you guys can address this. Hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is extremely important to understand because for me, I'm connecting dots all the time. You remember those dot to dots when you were little and you start at number 1 and you go all the way through and eventually you see a picture? That's what I do all the time. I am completely connecting dots. When I'm talking to someone, I'm connecting dots. When I'm driving in my car, what's the safest way to get home? Well, I'm going here, now I gotta figure out how to get home, and I gotta worry about my kids, and I have to do this, and I have to make sure I meet Nick and Debbie, and then my kids have to be picked up at 3 o'clock. All of these dots are being connected. And I have to make sure I'm safe. Because again, that hypervigilance goes back to that fear. And then I might have a flashback because I just drove by somewhere. Everything is connected. That's the hypervigilance. So when a client comes in, do you guys call them clients? What do you call clients?
Yeah.
Okay. So when a client comes in, all of this is going on in their head. All of this. They're exhausted. They're exhausted. Now, these are some of those other related symptoms. They can have anxiety along with this. Borderline personality, it may be in there, or they may have borderline and not have PTSD, but they sometimes get clouded like that. Because again, imagine if you're being avoidant and you have this fear with borderline, and we're going to go over that more in detail, that sometimes looks very similar. Some people have told me with my PTSD, Christine, you look 18 feet tall when you get angry. It's not that I'm angry, I'm scared. I'm fearful. I'm only 5'5" without my heels. But they tell me I look 18 feet tall. But I'm scared. So that comes out with the PTSD. Depression, that's obviously, if you're scared, you've gone through traumatic events, depression's going to come along with that. Substance abuse. Well, if you're scared, you've been abused, you don't understand what's going on, and you just want something to calm that pain. That comes along with it. Borderline personality. Symptoms, fear of abandonment. So now we're switching gears. This is not PTSD. This is borderline personality disorder. They have a fear of abandonment. So again, very similar to PTSD. We have avoidant techniques. They have fear of abandonment. Unstable personal relationships. They're in love with you 1 minute, they hate you the next minute. So in PTSD, we have fear and then we avoid. So that can get clouded and you may not understand what is really going on with this client. Distorted and unstable self-image. They don't like themselves, or they don't understand themselves. They don't know why they're not as good as everybody else. If you have PTSD and you've been abused, you don't think you're worth anything. Impulsive behaviors, unsafe sex, excessive spending, substance abuse. Again, substance abuse, just like PTSD. Self-harming. This one is pretty easy to identify in borderline. PTSD, I have not found a lot of self-harm in that, but in borderline, I do find more of it. So, but it's important to really rule out the difference between PTSD and borderline, because a lot of women get diagnosed with borderline that may be PTSD. Borderline is a very easy thing to diagnose, especially in women, and it could be PTSD. So here are some of the symptoms, though, of borderline. They have intense depression. They feel empty at all times. No relationship is good enough. They're in love, in love, in love, in love, in love. No matter how in love they are, no matter how much someone loves them, they're still empty. They're not worth anything. In PTSD, you're not worried about being in love. You're worried about your safety. You're always worried about your safety and your fear. So that's a clear distinction between PTSD and borderline. They have inappropriate, intense, uncontrollable anger. That is a similarity. There is some anger because you're always scared in PTSD. They dissociate in borderline. They have out-of-body experiences. Now, it's important to know that all these symptoms do not present the same in every single person. Same thing with PTSD. So if I came in front of you, many of you saw me this morning, you had no idea I had PTSD. I don't look like I was abused. I don't look like I was raped. You would have no idea. So we can't see these things in people, but it's important to know how to behave and how to react to someone who may present with these symptoms. So in borderline, what are the causes? What we know is a lot of times it's genetic. They're 5 times more common to have it if someone else in the family had it. Environmental. A traumatic life event sometimes will produce this. Brain function, emotional regulation. Their emotional regulation is different than people who do not have it. And again, that's that emotional dysregulation. I love you, I hate you with borderline. So again, this is why I want to make that distinction for you, because, and I know you guys are not diagnosing them, you're kind of referring them to the different places to get help. But when we come across a woman or a man and they have these intense emotions or intense feelings, or they're telling you to F off or whatever they're saying at that point, or they're crying and their only need is to get to their man or get to their partner, we need to have some empathy for them. And we really need to understand where they're coming from and what their needs are. So when they're coming in as someone who just came out of an abusive relationship, and you have this actually on a flyer in front of you, you should have it. It says the strengths, and on the bottom is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They are right here. This is where we need to be, their basic needs. If they're aggressive, emotionally aggressive, physically aggressive, if they're telling you, I know they're coming there for shelter and they want PFAs or whatever they're trying, at some point they may become aggressive. If we can fulfill their food, water, rest, and security and safety needs, that's where we need to start. We can't start asking them, well, what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? Do you want to get a job? Maybe we can fill out some applications. We need to start with their basic needs. And once we do that, they will trust us again, especially if they have PTSD. That's where we need to be. Basic needs. Can I get you something to snack on? Can I get you a bottle of water? Do you need a blanket? That's where we have to start with victims who have PTSD. And even if we don't know they have PTSD, if they came from an abusive relationship or a traumatic event, odds are they're going to have something similar to that. So, this is extremely important. When you're managing aggressive behavior, and I don't mean that they're throwing chairs at you, I mean emotionally aggressive as well, and vulnerable, and delicate, and fragile, coming from any abusive interaction. We need to speak softer than the other person. Do not talk like this to them and insult their intelligence. But whatever level they are at, I just want you to talk a little softer than them. Ask if it's okay to approach them at that moment. So if I have a form they need to fill out to come into our shelter, tell them, I really need you to fill this out. Is now a good time for you to fill this out? Give them some control back, because they just had all their control taken away from them. If they say no, ask them or tell them, it's okay that you don't fill it out now, but I'm going to be back in 5 minutes, and I will need you to fill it out at that point. You're allowing them to say no, but you're telling them they will have to fill it out in 5 minutes. Respect their personal space. Give them a foot between you and them. I'll show you with Nick and I. Do not come up with your clipboard and go like this. Here, I need you to fill this out. Can you please fill this out for me? You should not be above them. You should come. I'm going to do it again. You should come. You should sit next to them. You should be at eye level. And you should say, can you please fill this out for me?
Sure.
Thank you. And have them fill that out. And that would have been already after you asked them, would it be okay to fill it out? Again, come at eye level with them. Control the amount of eye contact. And what I mean by this is take their lead. So again, with different cultures, eye contact is different. So take their lead. If they're not looking at you, you don't need to be intently staring at them in the eyes. If they're looking at you but then looking away, kind of just follow that. Eye contact is important. It lets them know that you're listening to them. It lets you know that you value that conversation. But nobody should feel that you're staring through their soul, because that's uncomfortable to some people. Okay? And especially, remember, culturally, eye contact is different. So we need to follow their lead on eye contact. And do not touch them. I don't care if you're touchy-feely in your family, don't touch them. Do not touch them. As you build a relationship and a rapport with them, you, again, take their lead on touching. But do not touch them. Do not come in and say, oh, you know what? This is going to be a great, experience. I'm going to come to the courthouse with you. We're going to get the PFA together. Don't touch them. It's not okay. You can ask them, but you can't just go up and touch them. Especially coming out of an abusive relationship or, whatever traumatic event they just had. And I'll turn it over to Debbie.
I'm going to adjust it again.
All right. Has anybody, which one do I push?
The
Side.
Okay. Heard the word anagnosia. So anagnosia is the lack of insight, and this isn't specific to mental illness. People have this maybe with diabetes or other illnesses as well, but in this case we're talking about mental illness. It's the lack of insight that somebody's not aware of their own mental health condition. It's very common. It's not something that you see in every person with the mental illness. Some people have this, some people don't. As well as self-awareness. And over time, somebody may acknowledge that they have a mental illness and may be aware of it and may be able to engage in treatment. And then sometimes after their medication's working or even for any other reason, suddenly they don't realize that they're ill again. It's not really, we hear a lot of times people say they're in denial. Sometimes it is denial, but sometimes it really is the lack of insight. And sometimes you'll have a person that can sit there and tell you that the grass is blue, and they will swear up and down and left and right that grass is blue. And that's what they really believe. This misrepresentation often causes a conflict with family members, and we hear a lot of people, well, I'm not going to buy into what he's telling me, that the TV's talking to him. I don't want to buy into that. And you really don't have to buy into it. What I tell families to tell people is that it must be scary that you believe that. I don't see that, or I don't hear that. To me, the grass looks green, but I can understand that you're feeling that, or you're perceiving what's going on. But often it keeps people from taking their medication, and when somebody is psychotic or manic, it can lead to reckless behavior. Now, assisted outpatient treatment has recently been signed by the governor in Pennsylvania. However, there wasn't a whole lot of funding behind this, but assisted outpatient treatment is when the court allows for supervised treatment within the community, and the person has to meet specific criteria. They have to have a prior history of repeated hospitalizations, arrests, or symptoms that are continuously happening. AOT laws have been shown to reduce hospitalizations, incarceration, arrests, homelessness, victimization, also reduces violence. It's also known as involuntary outpatient treatment or outpatient commitment. Now, has anybody ever heard of involuntary commitment or a 302 laws? Do you know how, and I have the slide up here already, so the answer is right there, but do you know how long they are allowed to hold you under a 302 commitment?
72 hours.
Yeah, no. That's a very big myth, and even the police will tell you that, and it is absolutely not true. A voluntary admission, if a lot of times the crisis team may try to get somebody to sign themselves in. That is a voluntary commitment. That is a 201. And when you do that, if somebody voluntarily decides to go in the hospital, they can, after they do that, decide that they want to leave, but they have to give 72-hour notice. So that's where that 72-hour hold comes in. So they cannot leave the hospital until those 72 hours have lapsed. However, a 302 is an involuntary commitment. So if you voluntarily decide to go in the hospital and the doctor sees you in there and decides, or the treatment team decides that no, this person needs to be in the hospital, they can convert this to a involuntarily commitment, and that's a 302. So if that happens, then they have to go to court within 5 days to determine whether they can legally hold somebody. And the criteria is very narrow. Sometimes you can be on one side of County Line Road and get a different answer than on this side of County Line Road, or even different municipalities. But the criteria is they have to be a risk at harming themselves or themselves, and they are unable to care for themselves. Now that is often open to interpretation. You may find somebody living behind a convenience store freezing to death with bare feet and shorts on. That, in my mind, would say that they are unable to care for themselves. But that really depends on a lot of other things. Yes?
Mental health court within 5 days for determination of legal. Is that the hospital people or the people who are getting who? It
would be
if
somebody was in the hospital and they were put in the hospital for 302. That court date would be within 5 days to determine if they still need to be in there.
Well, the question I'm asking is who's responsible for making
that would be
happen?
The treatment team. Most likely the doctor would be one of the people that would sign it, but it can also be the treatment team within the hospital setting.
Okay.
And they have to pose a clear and present danger to themselves or somebody else. So often that means they have to be saying, I'm going to kill myself or I'm going to hurt somebody. And sometimes it literally means that they have to say that. So if they get into a crisis center and they'll say, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm not going to hurt anybody. And unless it's very iffy, and it really is up to the crisis worker and ultimately the delegate with the county. So the petitioner is the person requesting an evaluation, and this can be anybody. This could be the police, it could be a family member, it could be you, it could be anybody. So they have to have firsthand knowledge of what's going on, and it has to be, I don't even know if it's up here, within the past 30 days that show that they are an imminent threat to themselves or somebody else. What happens is if you take somebody to the crisis center, they will evaluate it. The crisis worker will go through all the details. They will interview the person, and then they will call in with that information to the Office of Mental Health for an evaluation to determine whether it's approved or denied. Petitions by police or doctors don't require the delegate to approve that. So if it's approved by the petitioner, they'll be giving further instructions on how to have the person transported to the crisis center. Sometimes the police will come and meet the person somewhere and transport them to the crisis center. Sometimes the family will take them, and like I mentioned earlier, sometimes that's not a good idea in case somebody grabs the steering wheel or they're trying to change their minds, they don't want to go anymore. So when they get to the hospital, they'll be evaluated by mental health professionals, and they'll determine if they meet the needs to be involuntarily committed. And, so after that, suppose the person's in the hospital and the doctor or the treatment team feels that they need to be further evaluated and stay in the hospital longer. That would be called the 302 or 303. So they either have to be discharged within 5 days or brought to the mental health court within 120 hours to request a longer commitment. This is based, again, on the treatment team or the the doctor, and it's based on the safety for the person or the other, for anybody else. And then that court will determine whether that person could be held longer. And I think that's on the next slide. We talk about the proceedings. The family, if the family is the person who asked for the 302 or the 303 in the first place, they are permitted to come to the hearing. However, if the person who is ill doesn't want the family there and they are not the petitioners, they can be excluded. They're non-public and they are confidential. They can have their family members there if they want. They can also have an attorney. They can have somebody as a support. It's up to the person. Often, and you will hear this a lot, that somebody gets 302'd and the family has no idea where they are. Are they in the hospital? Where did they take them? The hospital doesn't have to tell anybody anything. So we often, when we answer the helpline, we'll have people call and say, I don't know where my daughter is. They took her and I don't know where they are and they won't tell me. So unless that person signs a HIPAA release form, they can't even acknowledge that they know who this person is, or if they're there, they can't deny, they can't say, yes, they're here, no, they're not here. They can't tell you anything. I tell families that you can call them. You can call a hospital, and again, they're not going to say they're here or they're not here, but you can tell them whatever you want. They may play the game with you. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't listen to you. I can't say anything. I can't. But you can tell them. You can say, this is what I've seen happening. This is what I'm afraid of. So don't let that be a barrier, and it often is. Yes.
So I'm sorry. This is my first exposure to this.
Mm-hmm.
So I have somebody. I'm talking to someone, and I'm going to say to them, well, you could, investigate having them 302.
Mm-hmm.
Who do I tell them to call? Who initiates that?
The crisis.
Where does the petitioner go?
Well, the crisis center, and you have little key tags on your that were put out here. They all have the crisis numbers on there. So there's a couple things. There's a crisis center at Doylestown Hospital, right inside the emergency room, and there is one at Lower Bucks Hospital.
And they can take them through the steps of what.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Also, if the person refuses to go and you can't get them to go there, you can always call on this key tag here, the mobile crisis. And sometimes they will come out. It depends on what the situation is. You'll have to kind of go into detail of what it is, and then they decide if it meets that criteria. But they can come out, and sometimes even if they can't get them into the hospital, they can often get them into services and try to get them, into treatment. Yes.
And maybe I'm asking this prematurely, but
Mm-hmm.
where would, if somebody survives a suicide attempt,
Mm-hmm.
where does that fit in?
Well, it would depend on a couple things. If they would have to be medically clear before they could go into a psychiatric hospital anyway. So if they're, I guess it depends on what the suicide attempt was. They may be in a regular hospital emergency room, but after that they would go wherever there's an open bed, honestly. Mm-hmm. So if they were in crisis in the crisis center or had the mobile crisis team come out, it would really boil down to where there's an open bed, and sometimes that's out of the county, it's out of the area. So the hearings are administrative hearings. They are informal. It's not like you're in an actual courtroom. You're in a room where they have a hearing. So rules of evidence don't apply. Hearsay, you can't just say something and whatever. But the purpose of the hearing is to gather as much as information as possible so the court can decide. Go ahead.
I've often heard of abusers 302ing their
That can happen.
their intimate partners, and I feel like that happens more often, even though the abusers might be the ones with a mental health problem, and so then they can spin the story to the police, they can spin the story to the hospital that something's happened
that's-
with her.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I often say that, in the past that used to happen a lot, and then the pendulum swung this way and it goes back and forth a little bit too much this way or a little bit too much that way, and that's why like our assisted outpatient treatment laws were kind of, people were fighting for that, because there has to be a history. So again, yes, it could happen, and sometimes people are really good manipulators and able to do that, but we kind of hope that's what these hearings are for, so that a judge can listen to both sides of the story and hopefully come out with the right conclusion. But yes, that I have to say it can happen.
Debbie, can I get one
Sure.
thing? Just in my private practice as well, if somebody wants to go to crisis, and if you have a relationship with a therapist, I actually will go to crisis with my clients, and be there for support with them. And again, if you're in therapy, the therapist can also have notes, you have a past and history with the therapist, so that is evidence of what's been going on in the relationships. It's not just he said, she said, or she said, she said. So that is something to keep in mind, and why you should have, if you're going through a relationship and there is conflict in that relationship, the more people you're talking to, the better that is for you. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But as a therapist, that is not every therapist does this, but I know I've always been trained. If anytime someone is going to crisis, we always make an effort to go with them. Also with child services, same thing. So yes.
So in that case, if you're going with your client, and their family wants to know where their client is it you that they?
Only if they have signed a release for me to speak with them.
In the same situation.
Yep.
Okay.
Only if I have a release signed. Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, yeah, I mean, it really does happen, and people can manipulate, and especially if somebody's going through so much trauma from being abused, they may come off being perceived as having a mental illness or being in crisis, that they need to be in the hospital. So that's a great point that you make. Yes.
I apologize if this is like everybody knows this and I'm really
No.
doesn't. Because I knew like what 302 meant, and I just thought it was like then they go to the hospital and then like they get released. I didn't know about this like the judge and the hearing and all this legal stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it. There is. And
so like, and you said it's you don't go to like the courthouse. Is this
no?
like
It's usually done right in the facility.
In the hospital or the facility. Okay, and then is it like a special healthcare judge?
It's a person who typically does those kind of things.
Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so you would just more go in like a room in the healthcare facility, and this is a judge who does like healthcare stuff as a judge, and yeah, that's just like.
Yeah, and
wild
this
to
is,
me.
believe me, I am
this whole,
skimming
legal
over
piece
this.
of
This is
it.
very basic, but if somebody went to the hospital, to the crisis center and was 302'd, I mean, they could be in there for an hour and the doctor could see them and say, no, they don't need to be here, and send them out. And that happens. And a lot of times we get people that, like, oh my God, he went to the crisis center, they 302'd him, and the next thing I know, he's standing on my doorstep again. It does happen.
So is it because it's an involuntary thing and healthcare, like, shouldn't be an involuntary thing, and that's why there's this whole, like, legal piece to it?
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I live with a mental illness, and so after the break I'll tell you my story. But every time I go to my therapist and we sit down, I have this fear of being 302'd when there's nothing wrong. I have no problem with going inpatient if I need it. But there is an innate fear that because of one misstep or one behavior, that my sister or someone will just say, no, that's it, I'm calling police and we're doing this. And so I think this is in process, and my therapist does constantly explain to me that I'm not a candidate and that it's a process, and I know the process, but it's just, being inpatient isn't really part of the regular human experience, being in a locked facility. And although it wasn't a horrible, horrible experience for me, it's not something that I want to repeat. For me, it represents, it's over for now, and now from here you have to start over. And so that's, I think, why this process is in place, so that people who need it get it, and those who don't. But
And something I want to add to that, and I tell families this all the time when they call, because sometimes somebody is really sick, and being psychotic and having hallucinations or delusions is not a reason to be put in the hospital. And what I try to get them to understand is the hospital is not necessarily there to treat somebody, to get them fixed and on their way to having a normal life. It is really there to keep them out of an immediate crisis and to keep them safe. So, and I could go back to when my son was hospitalized the first time, and they kept telling me, oh, he's fine, he's fine. And I would go to visit him, and he could barely walk. So I didn't understand that concept. So he wasn't fine to me. He couldn't live like that, but he was safe. So that is really what the role of a hospital is, and I caution families to use this very sparingly and not to use it as a punishment, that it is something that is there to keep them safe and to help them, but it is really a Band-Aid. It's not meant to be long-term treatment, so it's traumatizing for the person when they get in there. Nick explained how you're in a locked facility. To some people, it's very, very traumatizing, and afterwards they may never forgive you. So you have to use it sparingly, and you have to understand what the role of it is. It is not necessarily for long-term treatment.
Again, I'm Nick. Just a more condensed version of my story. And when I was going through this, I thought, what would I like them to know about me? And we give a presentation in middle schools and high schools about mental health and mental illness, suicide prevention, substance use, called Ending the Silence. And we do just about every middle school in Bucks County and almost every high school, some private. This is me. This is me when I was little with my mom. This is my brave. This is NAMI Man. And that is our national CEO, Mary Giliberti. And it's just a progression of things for me. We even were honored with having a breakfast with Tipper Gore at our national convention in July in New Orleans. So I've gone through a lot in my life. But I want to know, every time I get up, does mental illness scare you? So if someone came to you and presented with mental health challenges that we discussed earlier, would that scare you? Honestly, raise your hand if it does. I raised my hand. I have a mental illness. It does scare me. And it scares me because I don't know everything about it. I revealed to you earlier that I'm always scared that I'll be hospitalized involuntarily. It's like being born with a tail. How do you know that it's any different than anybody else until the first time you go swimming? I did not know that there was anything wrong with me. I have schizoaffective disorder. My next question is always to take a good look at me, and do I look like I have a mental illness? Do I look like someone who lives with a mental illness? Do I match what you think mental illness looks like?
This is going to sound weird, but yes, because anybody can.
That's a great answer. It is. It can be anybody. For kids, when we do this with kids, the presentation, they say no. Oh, no. No. I'm always afraid that when people see me, they'll see the mental illness. It's an invisible illness. What I would like them to know about me is that I'm a son, a brother, a friend, a writer, a poet, a graphic designer. I work for NAMI in outreach and development. I do our website and our social media. I do things like this. There's lots of things that I'm good at, and they were all things that I was bullied for. I was tortured for them. And my way of dealing with that, of coping with it, was eating. So my addiction when I was little was eating food. And so I gained a lot of weight, which made me even more a larger target, literally a larger target. And so I got tortured, and I held this in, and I started a separation with reality because I tried to be this person that these people who were bullying me were, because I thought that was normal, and I thought that if I could be more like them, then this would stop. If I had the courage to say anything to anybody, it would be, it's okay if you don't like me, not everyone has good taste. And I probably wouldn't have had the courage to say that out loud, but if I could have said that to myself as positive self-talk, that's great positive self-talk. But I didn't. And so food it started out with. So these things all happened to me. So I decorate cakes also, which is a good thing about me. People with mental illness can do good things. So this is a Stranger Things cake that I made. That's me doing the 9 out of fondant. We're all adults. Everybody knows what fondant is. The kids have no idea. These are the little waffles. This is a bar mitzvah cake that I made. These are the logos out of fondant, and you paint them. That's a Hello Kitty cake, and the kids get such a kick out of me without a beard. And that's the biggest thing. We all just stop, that's what I look like without a beard. This is a drawing of a cake, because sometimes they're cool too. And this is a photo that I took in high school, won some awards for. So if all these good things have happened to me, what happened? So I got bullied really badly. I had an early onset of my symptoms as far back as kindergarten. I had a substitute teacher who came in, and you're good at a lot of things, but I wasn't good at everything. I couldn't tie my shoes. She told me that if I couldn't figure that out, that she'd hang me out of the window by my toenails. And I didn't know what to make of that as a little kid. So I had what started out as, I think it was a 4 or 5 day long panic attack. And no one knew what that was, and if they did, they didn't say. I was evaluated, and they said that I was gifted. And so I was put into the gifted program, which doesn't help you deal with this stuff. So if nothing was there in place to help me deal with it, there was no education, no one was aware of really what was going on, I turned to drugs and alcohol to cope with this. And while that did not, I am not by nature a violent person, and by nature I mean that it just does not occur to me to be violent toward anybody else or abusive. What I am, however, admittedly, is violent and abusive inward to myself. I treat myself horribly. So that has created a definite separation in reality for me. And then I had a lot of death and trauma in my life. My dad was not physically abusive, but he was emotionally absent, and when he was there, he was the disciplinarian, and I was always threatened with, just wait until your father gets home. And so I was traumatized by waiting for my father to get home all the time. So I was terrified of my father. So whatever happened with my dad, he didn't even have to touch me. He could just look at me, and that was like getting punched in the face. What happened was that my mom was my anchor in reality. I was violent to myself, I was abusive to myself, and I turned to drugs and alcohol, was drinking and doing drugs, and my mom was my only tie. And I woke up one morning, and my mom was unconscious, and I didn't know what was going on, but she was face down, and I rolled her over. She had knocked her teeth out, and I pulled them out, I gave her CPR, and she just started throwing up. And I thought maybe she had a stroke, I didn't know, but when she was taken to Lower Bucks Hospital and then to Jefferson, they said that she had had a brain aneurysm. And they told me that I should have hope. They told me to go back to work, and I did, and I got a call one day that we had to take her off life support. So that happened, and when that happened, I gave up on life altogether. And I didn't care what I did. Drugs, pills, never like heroin or anything like that, but opiates and benzos, and they're very effective in relieving all pain, including emotional pain, temporarily, until you need more, and then you need more. And I said that I'm not a violent person or an abusive person, but I really would have done anything that I had to do to get what I needed. It becomes life or death, and I sort of gave up on life, but I sort of didn't, and so my means of survival were these drugs. So that's what I did. And I made it to my mom, the first birthday after my mom's passing, what would have been her first birthday after that, and she passed away in January, made it to September, and I had a plan to end my life, and it involved those drugs. And so I just took as much as I could until I lost consciousness, and I'm here. It didn't work. So I woke up 3 days later, and I went into work, and I got arrested. And when that happens, you wonder if they know who you are. And it was all because I was afraid to ask for help. You don't know that there is help for things that you don't know exist. So I got arrested, and I'm sitting back there, and I'm thinking, don't they know who I am? You know, don't they know that I'm a son, a brother, a friend, a writer, and a poet, graphic designer? I make cakes. Like, don't they know? But it's not their job to know. If a CIT officer, a crisis intervention trained officer, which we'll talk about later, was involved, maybe I wouldn't have been arrested. Maybe I would have been taken to treatment. But I had to go to a county jail first and sit there and bail myself out and then find my own treatment, which was a rehab. But the worst part of all that was I was sitting in the back of the cop car, and I thought to myself, if my mom is looking down on me from wherever you are and thinking I didn't raise Nicky like this, he is a good boy, he did not mean to do this, because all he was trying to do was get rid of all this pain that he had, by any means necessary. So, told you I tried to take my life. That landed me in the hospital multiple times, because when you feel like you are such a burden on everybody else and you cannot get your act together, what alternative is there? I was put on the wrong medications with awful side effects because I was not comfortable with saying that I had a separation from reality. Sometimes I didn't know what was real. Sometimes I heard things that probably no one else heard. I was okay with saying, yes, I have anxiety, yes, I have depression. My mom died. I thought that I should be as sad in proportion to how much I loved her, and that if I stopped the sadness, then she would not think that I loved her anymore. So I was okay with saying that. So I got treatment for drug and alcohol addiction. So I wasn't honest about my symptoms, and I thought, if this medication isn't working and I did what I was supposed to do, then what do adults do to get by? They drink. There's bars everywhere. So that's what I did. And I went into another hospital because, like Debbie said earlier, with her husband and the alcohol, alcohol consumption may not bring on a psychosis or a mental illness, but for someone like me who already had mental health challenges, it just, and then combined with that medication, that was a psychosis. Talking to bushes and thinking that elves were holding my car up, and thinking that I was on the show Intervention and that I was going to jail. I didn't know until later in this one particular psychosis that my sister came in my room to check on me, and I was packing bags, and she's a dental hygienist, and I said, why is a prison guard wearing scrubs? And I don't remember that. I remember thinking that I might be going to jail, or that I might be in jail, or that I was on the show Intervention and thought I was texting everybody. Now, the thing is that I'm not a violent person, and I'm not aggressive by nature, but in a hallucination or a delusion or in that psychosis, I felt or I perceived that someone was attacking me. I would have defended myself. I would have had no choice. It wasn't really me. I don't even really entirely remember all of it. I depend on what my sister had said, and then what I found out afterwards. So that's really scary. So I was sitting in that next hospital, and I thought, well, maybe since I didn't do anything to deserve this and I didn't ask for it, that it's okay to not be okay. So we have this hashtag, but it's not okay to stay that way. Maybe I don't have to be this guy I made myself to be. I wanted a better life, and I stopped comparing myself to what normal is. My brain just did something that I didn't know that it was ever capable of. If this happens to other people too, what is normal? I stopped ignoring all my symptoms, and I started speaking up about what I needed. I said, okay, well, so I'm probably not the only one. Sometimes I don't know what's real. And I stopped keeping secrets. Like I said, it's not my fault. I got sober, and when I tell the kids, I got sober, if you don't get drunk, you don't need to get sober. I was put on the right medication. I go to therapy once a week, every Friday. I eat better, I sleep better, I exercise. Those are non-negotiables for me. Once I get less than 3 hours of sleep for a couple days, it's psychosis. And you hear things and you do see those things. It's not just one flash out of the side of your eye in your periphery. It's like a constant barrage. So these things are hard to mistake. It's not just that anybody could have psychosis at any given time. I also choose to focus on all those positive things that I was bullied for. And then I learned to love myself, because I tell the kids, and it's so true, it might be corny, but our differences are our superpowers. There's this anger that comes from comparing yourself to someone else and then not being able to live up to it. So everyone has a brain, there's no shame in that. Physical health and mental health are equally important. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and there's always hope, and Christine will talk to you a little bit about hope. I wanted to share something with you, though. There was a post I just put up on Facebook or Instagram. So this is called Dope Stuff My Therapist Says.
Is this an Instagram page we can follow?
It is. Well, go and follow NAMI Bucks. It's up there.
All right.
So it says, what if your anger is the only way your grief feels safe enough to express itself? So what if your anger is the only way your grief feels safe enough to express itself? So something to think about, and then I will turn it over. So that was my story, and you know where I am today because I'm here and talking to you. But I will skip to the next.
And for lack of time, I'm going to be very quick with that. As far as resources are concerned, we have base service units, and they are Lenape Valley Foundation here in Doylestown, Penn Foundation in Sellersville, and Pendel Mental Health in Pendel. These are typically people that are on medical assistance use these services, but they also take private insurance as well. Crisis, we talked about that earlier. They are on the key tags here. CIT, and I know Nick mentioned them a few times. This is a crisis intervention team. These are officers, police officers, 911 operators, security guards, and whatnot that are trained to handle a mental health crisis. This is a 40-hour training that happens twice a year so that they can come out, keep the person safe and get them into treatment, keep the community safe and the police officers safe. Bucks County Opportunity Council, I'm sure you all know who they are. They have a lot of different services that are available and resources. And housing, which is the number one phone call that I get several times a day, is almost non-existent and very difficult in Bucks County. Bucks County Housing Link, I'm sure you heard of them as well, but they sometimes have help and resources for people that are looking for a place to live. One other thing, the lodge I wanted to mention. We talked about the hospital. Lenape Valley is built, it's in the process of being built, will be open, I guess, fairly soon. Is a step down from the hospital when you have people that do not want to be in a locked facility. This is a step down kind of thing where they can be in a secured setting, but it is not locked.
And just another resource to let you guys know, my private practice is mental health strength training, and I often, part of our ethics is we have to do pro bono work. So coming out and doing this for free, but also I take clients because going through divorce, leaving abusive relationships, not having health insurance, I take many clients who do not have health insurance, and absolutely free. As long as they're willing to invest their time, their gas money to come and see me, they stay up with their appointments. That investment to me is their payment for their therapy. So I do that for people coming out of jail, people coming out of prison, or anybody coming out of abusive relationships. So that's also another resource that I do as well. Yes.
Question.
Yeah.
Because that was something I was gonna ask about, just the barriers of obviously the healthcare system and
Mhm.
that therapists aren't cheap, even
Nope.
with the copay.
No, yep.
And so, is there any other advocacy work that NAMI does on that, or you said that you do that pro bono
Mm-hmm.
work? Do you know of other clinicians that do that, or is there any other advocacy that NAMI does in regard to that? Because even like, you know, more vulnerable groups, that's awesome. But even just like for anybody,
Well,
it's expensive.
Yeah.
Lenape, all the base service units also have sliding fee scales. So, and if the person is eligible for medical assistance, they will help them apply. And if they call our helpline, which is on all this literature, we can also walk them through that as well.
And I'm also on the professional development chair for PALGBTIC, which is the Pennsylvania Association of LGBT Issues in Counseling. So we actually have a group across the state of Pennsylvania. So we are trying to do that for the LGBT community as well, because it's very hard to find inclusive and affirmative counselors as well. So that's something I do also. So now we're going to talk about empathy. My One Woman's Hope program that I do talks about empathy exclusively, because without having empathy for myself and others, I would not be standing here in front of you. Going through the traumas that I endured in my life, my mother gave me unconditional love my entire life. She told me I could be anything I wanted to be. She unfortunately put it in my head I could be the first female president. So I thought that my entire life. I actually thought I would be the first female president, and then I realized I did not want to do that. Absolutely unconditional love. So it's called One Woman's Hope. It is not about me though. It's about my mother and what she raised me with and the unconditional love. But after my traumas, I realized that I had empathy for myself, that self-love that Nick talked about, loving himself. And empathy is something that is gone. You know, we have cell phones and we text and we don't see that eye contact or that body language. And if I tell you, you know, I'm not going to go out with you tonight, I'm going to go out with Julie, I can't see what that does to you because I'm texting you. That empathy, our technology went up and our empathy levels dropped. So I feel very fortunate to have had that empathy for myself, because I don't know that I would be here without those levels of empathy. So with abuse though, there needs to be empathy for the caretakers and the professionals that are taking care of survivors of abuse. But we also need to understand that the people who have gone through the abuse have high levels of empathy as well. And this is something that has not been really researched that much. So empathy, there's cognitive empathy, affective empathy, and then there's sympathy. Empathy is when you actually can put yourself in the other person's shoes. Sympathy is just saying, I kind of feel bad for you. Empathy is actually getting down into the hole with them and being down there with them. So cognitive empathy is experiencing and understanding it from their point of view. Affective empathy, many of you may not have heard about yet. This is the drive to respond to another person's mental state with the appropriate emotion. This is what survivors of abuse have the ability to do. This is what research is showing. Sympathy, again, is just saying, I feel bad that you went through that. Not really getting down into the hole with them. So there was a study done, and this set showed that there were elevated levels of empathy for adults who had childhood trauma. This is like breakthrough, because nobody ever studied this before. They studied the caretakers and the professionals and said they had higher amounts of empathy taking care of survivors of trauma. But this actually showed that there was an increase in awareness and that it could improve the ability to recognize, understand, and react appropriately to these states and others. And it makes sense, because if you're going through an abusive situation, you have that hypervigilance. You're actually paying more attention to what's going on around you, and you can actually put yourself in other people's shoes. So it actually logically makes sense that they have heightened levels of empathy for others. So this is the chart. The darker one is the adults who had childhood trauma. The lighter gray had no childhood trauma. Cognitive empathy, higher. Affective empathy, higher. Social skills, lower, which makes sense because they had the childhood trauma. So when you're dealing with your clients, remember this. That's a strength of theirs. They probably have more empathy. So if they're sharing a room with someone, they're going to defend that roommate generally. If they make that bond with them, they're going to have more empathy for their roommate. They're going to defend them. Generally, not all the time if they don't get along, because I've worked in shelters before and other things happen. But that's a strength of them. They have empathy. And this is something you can share with them. You can bring up this study. So they can focus on healing when it felt like there was no end or point to feeling so much pain. So even though they were going through these traumatic experiences, they still reached out to a woman's place. They still found a way to get to your door. Even though some of them may have been emotionally abused, physically abused, sexually abused, they found a way to get to that door or get to that phone. Hanging in there and keeping yourself alive when it felt unbearable. That's a strength. Holding on to hope when they felt hopeless and lost. That's a huge strength. Reaching out for support when there was little or no support for them. That's a huge strength. It's amazing what some of these women went through. Reaching out a hand to a friend in need when you were in a lot of pain yourself. And you probably see this in the shelter because they're willing to give the shirt off their back when they have nothing to the other women. That's a huge strength. Accepting and extending a hand when you felt like no one could ever care about you. They feel useless. They feel they have nothing to give, yet they're going to give everything to everybody else. Daring to trust when no one in your life was trustworthy. They're trusting you guys. They're trusting a woman's place with their life, with their children. It's their last-ditch effort when they couldn't trust anyone. That's a huge strength to still have that little bit of trust left. And that's why it's so important what we went through earlier when I said about talking softly, going down to their eye level, not touching them, giving that personal space because they are trusting you and you don't want to violate that trust that they have. And then there's more additional strengths on this handout. And this is something you can hang up in your office or at your house. You can also give these to your clients to remind them they do have strengths. They are stronger than they think they are. And trauma does not always mean it's a negative. We get strengths out of trauma. So you can give them this and remind them of that.
So the last part, and we were going a little bit over, are NAMI programs, and I can do this without slides. Like Christine said, these people coming to you have been through it and are in a need of all the support they can get. So the brochures that you've got in front of you, without discussing every single program that we have to offer. So we have Connection is our peer support group. It used to be for people living with a mental health condition that was diagnosed and they're under the care of a physician, but now it is for anyone questioning, regardless of the circumstances. Anyone is welcome here. And it's peer-led. I am one of the group facilitators, and we have a model to it. There's a check-in. Everybody gets what they need from it. And it's peers. There are no family members here at this group. Because there is a family support group also, which is led by other family members. So for family members, that's their peer. So we have peer support groups for families and people living with mental health conditions. If someone is newly diagnosed or has had a mental illness for a while, but just would like to know more about it, we have peer-to-peer, which is an 8-week class, and it teaches you about the brain, about the illness, what recovery is, what is possible, how to get there. And for families, we have Family to Family, which is a 12-week course for family members, significant others, loved ones of people living with mental health conditions, because that poses unique challenges too. But anyone is welcome at any of these, and everything that we do is free. And I know that Debbie spoke about CIT. I didn't know that it would require a training for police officers to be sensitive to the needs of someone like me, but it was startling to hear how they spoke about people with mental illness when we first got in the room, and they were making fun of me. I took it personally, saying that people like me just needed a smack in the face or a smack on the ass or something, whatever they said. And I thought, oh my God. And then when they leave, it's a completely different story. So it is beneficial that if you need police involvement, that you call 911 and ask for a CIT officer on duty wherever you are. Doesn't matter if one is on duty, if there's some sort of reciprocity, it's up to the police departments, but they can send someone from a neighboring jurisdiction or whatever
Would have a little pin like this.
to respond to a crisis. And they have a little CIT shield pin. But they've learned that I don't necessarily need jail, that I don't necessarily mean some of the things that I would do in a psychosis, that it's not intentional. They learn about that. So you can now call 911 and ask for a CIT officer on duty, and the 911 operator has a button that they can push to locate a CIT officer that can respond to a crisis, so that someone like the gentleman that I described earlier who was having symptoms from his schizophrenia didn't have to go to jail. That's great. We don't want the Bucks County Correctional Facility to be the largest mental health facility anymore.
And Nick, just to add to that, with my clients, I actually have them go to the police station prior, introduce themselves, meet the CIT officers. So if there is a crisis, they already have that relationship with the police department.
And with that being said, Connection, the peer support group, we're actually implementing this support group in the Bucks County Correctional Facility in 2019. There will probably be a reentry group also. I was discussing that with somebody. And the goal is to have a full mental health court in Bucks County. Right now we have drug court and co-occurring. But basically, if you have someone who comes across your path, and no matter what stage of emotional recovery they're in or not even close to it, and you need support for you, you call us. You have our helpline. If you want to make sure that someone is treated well, as we guide them through the system, you call us. We're just there for you, to support you. I mean, this isn't the easiest job, but it's very important. And you are an extension of us sometimes. I mean, sometimes people with mental illness, their first contact is with us. Sometimes they were abused, and you'll be their first contact. Sometimes people come to us and we refer them to you. But if we work together and help people to get some education and some support, and you let them know that there are people like us advocating for them, and we let them know that you're out there advocating for them too, I think that we have a better outcome for everybody. Everybody's safer, and everybody is supported, and there's no one else out there like them. We want to keep them here, and together we do that. So, does anyone want to stick around for questions?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Do we want to answer some?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, good. Where did you put them? Did I move them to the front? I did. All right, biggest mental health challenge, my own internalized shame and stigma. it's the reason that I didn't get help until I was 28 years old. Full help. But what we do is we live as living, breathing examples of what mental health, mental illness could be, what a survivor of abuse could be, and we do that. We don't do it silently. So I like to say we fight in the open. It's a term we borrow from Mental Health America. We fight in the open, and I fight in the open. I have bad days. We were preparing for this morning, and I was running all over the place in the office, and I said, Debbie, I'm sorry. But, there's things that are good about my mental illness that are great, and I love them. Yes, they're my superpowers. NAMI Man, by the way, will come out to visit you and declare a woman's place stigma-free. So there are things that I love, and then there are things that I know I'm annoying, and I know that this is happening, but it's part of me, and combined, what I said in that speech, I'm a piece of work. So,
That's right.
But how to deal with that is I still go to therapy every single week because I need to tell her this was an awesome week. No voices, no nothing. I have OCD also. I had no obsessions. Well, that never happened. So I had fewer obsessions. Whatever. I mean, I have to talk it out. I mean, I talking it out helps me process what's going on within me. So that shame, I have to get it out. The stigma, I get it out. And I need that validation that it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to think those things, and they're real. So, do you want to take one?
Sure. Biggest mental health issue. How does one deal with a narcissist?
She laughs.
I get this. I have a lot of clients that are dealing with this. You have to cut off communication. It has to be cut off, unfortunately. It's very hard, but it has to be cut off. And there's lots of articles and research, and usually empaths are connected with narcissists. There's that drive to be connected, but you have to cut off communication. It's hard when you have children. It's hard when you're still living in the same house. But that is the ultimate, and I have books in my office about it, but it has to be a clean cut. And that is the safest way, but that is how it has to be done. At least that's what the research says, yeah. So, yes?
I have to ask a question.
Yeah.
Because that was my question.
Sure.
So you're saying that you can't have a relationship with a narcissist at all?
You can, but you have to understand what the relationship is. I'm saying if you want to break off the relationship, it has to be a clean cut. There can be, if you want to continue a relationship with the narcissist, you have to understand that there is no empathy there from the narcissist, and you have to understand that you will give more, and if you truly want to keep this relationship going, you have to understand what that person is going to be like and what you're going to be like and what the boundaries are going to be. But there are people who do have relationships. But
Because I think a lot of our clients, many of them, are dealing with narcissists.
yeah, boundaries are critical. And if they have clear boundaries and expectations, you have to know what your expectations are and know what that other person is capable of and what they're not capable of. Yeah. That's, yeah.
My one was understanding mental health disorders at a young age, what resources. Nick mentioned Ending the Silence, where we go into the schools. So we do presentations. We can tailor it to families, teachers. We've even done them in elementary schools, I'm sorry to say, but we've had some requests for that. So that is an ongoing program that we put it as a priority.
And my question ties into that kind of helping children process anger in a safe way when they're violent from seeing it at home. I don't know if you'd consider me violent, but I would explode, and I didn't see physical violence. My parents were not compatible, and they really didn't get along, and my mom was in control of everything, and there was a clash. But I internalized all that, and I needed to know that it was okay to feel what I was feeling. And with mental illness, with anger, with the abuse, everything like that, I needed to be met where I was. I didn't want to be taken to where you were. I didn't want to be taken to another place. I didn't want to be taken away from anger. I didn't want to be taken away from whatever it is I was feeling. That was just too much. And I needed to be met where exactly I was. I needed someone to, if they didn't understand, just come to me and tell me that it was okay where I was, and it was okay what I was feeling, especially when you're a kid and you don't really know societal norms, and you don't know what's okay and what's not okay. But you know that there's something going on that's not your fault, and it needs to be someone's fault. So you're blaming and you're aggressive, and it's really difficult and it's scary, and I just needed to be met where I was and like kind of negotiated with, So with Ending the Silence, where we go into the schools, a lot of kids are exposed to this, especially modified learning settings. These kids see things that kids shouldn't see, and they've been in mental health facilities, and they have either no parents, abusive parents, or parents who are drug addicts, and they like me because they feel like I can kind of automatically understand them, and I don't have to go far to meet them where they are. So they need that, especially as kids. You don't know that you're expected to do any kind of work to get somewhere else. It's just, I needed to be met where I was, and I see it in these kids too. You meet them where they are, and if they say no to something, it doesn't mean it's forever. It just means that I've already got a ton going on, and I need like 10 minutes to process that. So.
Clients not having basic needs met or time to pursue treatment, like having 3 children, no support, trying to coordinate their needs, obtain housing, and not following through on appointments. So my answer to this, which is kind of personal, I left agency work and opened a private practice because I saw too many people not getting the services they needed. So my philosophy was, I work weekends as a private practitioner. I work late nights because people work.
Yeah.
So why would I only work Monday through Friday till 5 or 6?
Right.
That's when everybody else is working. So I work on Saturdays and Sundays when people have off. I work till 8, 9 o'clock at night when people are off and kids are already at home and one spouse is home so they can come and see me. So I think it's really finding the services that fit the clients, not making the clients fit the services. And that's...
We help because there's already a shortage of mental health professionals, and then finding one that cares as much as Christine does to do things like that is really difficult. You need help. So you as the referral, the referring person, you need support too. So that's what we're here for. We're not just here for them.
Yeah, but and that's really my goal, not just my practice, but making a network of people like me, because we do this for the clients. You're never going to get rich in mental health. You know that. Never. But we're here for the clients, and I can't take all these clients, nor do I work across the state. But I want to refer clients, especially when they move, because who do I see when I move to Reading? I need to refer them to somebody out there that will do the same thing I do. So that's really, we need to find practitioners and services that fit our clients. We can't mold our clients to fit the services. And it's, to be honest, this client, they can't make their appointments. They have too much going on, and the services don't fit their needs. So I don't hold anything against that client.
That goes into the card I have, is access to mental health professionals, whether it be therapist, nurse practitioner, psychiatrist, before the patient gets to crisis. And like Christine said, a lot of them are not responsive, but they're getting better, and that's one of the things that we advocate for with our base service units. So they all have open access where you can go in for an appointment, but sometimes that appointment is a gatekeeper who decides what kind of appointment you need, and maybe 3 months later you'll get an appointment. But the only thing I can say is be persistent. Just keep being persistent, and
That's why it works the best when the person that you're trying to help wants help.
yeah.
I mean, so do 302s work sometimes? Yeah. But I have been in a hospital, and I have seen people who would have, broken their arms, like cut themselves up jumping through glass windows. They just don't want to be there. And, it's, if you're giving someone really good help and they don't want it, there were really good doctors and therapists where I was, and there was one, I'll never forget the one guy, it was during Hurricane Sandy. He did not want to be there, and he jumped through a window and ran to the train station, and and then he'll also get out and then tell you that this facility was the worst facility that I have ever seen in my entire life. They treated me like an animal, but he just didn't want to be there. So, it really helps if the person that you're helping wants treatment, and then sometimes you can accomplish that desire by having them talk to someone who's been through it, because chances are their vision of what mental illness is or what mental health challenges are not true and accurate. So when they talk to someone, a peer, it helps them to see like, oh wow, okay, maybe it's not like the movies, and maybe I don't have to be drooling in a dark hospital in a wheelchair with water running in the background, and I'm not a murderer, and I'm not a this, I'm not a that, and it helps them to want treatment if they don't think that they're a stereotype and that it looks real.
And that is also an answer to the question here.
I'm sorry, so along those lines, what do you do with someone who's kind of the anti-narcissist, who's constantly putting themselves last?
Is that you here?
No.
Oh.
Mine was the other question, but
Okay.
wants the help, and then when you advocate for them and the amount of phone calls, and the first question is always, is she in crisis? No, she's not yet in crisis, and then they say that the first available appointment is 2-3 months from now. They want the help, but there are no doctors available. They are in therapy, they go to their therapy session weekly, but even the therapist agrees that they need medication, but psychiatrists are not available. And the response when you call centers are, well, if they're in crisis, then go to the crisis center. Well, they're not in crisis. So what does one do aside from act like they're in crisis and tell them to show up at an emergency room, but they're so anti-narcissist, they're like, but I'm okay, I'm functioning.
And that is what I tell people sometimes that they have to do. And sometimes just going to the crisis center for medication, it will work. They will help you the first time, but if it repeatedly is a problem, then they may make you wait. But you can go to the crisis center sometimes.
What about going to their general practitioner? It's not ideal.
Yeah.
I'd rather see them go to a psychiatrist, but in the meantime, and then they can always tell their psychiatrist once they get there, hey, this is what the general practitioner put me on.
Right. Yeah, that was a suggestion. Even
Yeah.
the general practitioner is a good 2.5 months when you're not
Really?
in a meeting. Yeah.
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 It is a problem. It's an issue. And
Yeah, so my
that's-
suggestion was to change general practitioners, and then when they called as a new patient, it
Well,
was
then
even
it's 3 months,
further.
yeah.
So if the person doesn't, want to lie, or if the family member doesn't want to lie about this, really the best thing that we've got available until they get to see a psychiatrist or even a family practitioner is just lots of love and support. So
And exercise and,
and
mindfulness.
yeah, just coping
And
skills.
support groups.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, they're welcome at our support groups, and you will if you come in and you say when we check in at the table, I cannot get meds. We had one guy come in and say, "What do I have to do? Mow down a family of 4 to get my medication?" And we were able to work with him to try and get him in somewhere, because sometimes if you say NAMI told me to do this or whatever, that helped in that case, but it doesn't always. And what you will get is when you come to the group and you say that is, "Oh my God, me too. Oh my God." Well, when that happened to me, this is what I did, and it may not be like the best thing ever, but at least they'll feel a little bit better knowing that they're not the only ones, that they didn't do something like horribly wrong. And someone will also say, "Well, so I ate a lot of chocolate until I got my medicine, or I did breathing exercises until I got my medicine, or I went to the gym, or I did yoga, or whatever." And so they'll get some good feedback from their peers. So.
And I've been working with therapists to try and get more availability, but now that I'm hearing this, I can cast that web out to psychiatrists and see if we can get more psychiatrists to kind of get those immediate openings. If we say, hey, if NAMI sends you someone, can you have those openings for us? So that's a good idea.
Yeah, and sometimes people we call and they can hold beds or whatever, but it's difficult also because sometimes when we ask people if they've called a doctor or a therapist or anything like that, they just don't want to do it. So they tell us that there's a 7-month wait for my doctor or whatever, and they're just scared.
And
so.
you probably run into this too, and sometimes they want you to do it for them.
Yeah.
But
And
I
that-
did
that's
do it
frustrating,
for them, and
yeah.
I got the response
Yeah,
that there was no
Right.
appointment.
And psychiatrists get paid very little from insurance. So, for the amount of schooling and everything so they overbook. They're just book. So they don't have any time slots in there to put. That's why you're waiting like an hour past your appointment time. So they don't have those slots, and that's the insurance, jam up. So that's kind of where we're at.
Also, someone raised the point that sometimes people aren't able to make their appointments, and so they're dropped or whatever. We go to the base service units, Christine and Debbie and I, and we do little trainings on things like why that happens, and that people aren't just being lazy or irresponsible, or a big question is why do people stop taking their medication if it works? And the thing is that people just want to be back to normal, whatever they think normal is. And when they feel better, they think that is normal, and then they forget how they got there. And the medications have side effects. So once they're feeling better, those side effects can be eliminated, and it's maybe it's not rational, but you just want some normalcy back so badly that, okay, get rid of these side effects, get rid of the medication, I'll stay like this, it's got to be okay now. And that's the thinking. I've done it. I can't tell you how many times.
I've done it with antibiotics. I thought, I'm feeling good. I can
Yeah.
stop. No.
So we go out and we talk to mental health professionals about that stuff.
I'm gonna go on the other end, where somebody is overly going to all these meetings and still is not practicing the correct approach to life on life's terms, let's say, and is still continually bringing in the extra things, the outside things back into their lives.
What other things?
If you're going to your therapy sessions and you're talking to them, then it's like, once they're out of their therapy sessions, they're talking to you like they're talking to their therapy sessions. So it's like, what do you do kind of like to like bring them back to, you know, life the way, you know, utilize your tools that you've been taught, or do your medication and everything like that. They should be concentrating on that rather than continuing the dialogue about what's going on with them and why it's going on with them.
One of the things we teach in family to family is to use I statements with people. And you won't say, well, you're not doing this. You would say, I'm concerned, I worry about, or, you know, I statements. So it's coming from you, from your perspective, and you're not telling them what to do.
Right.
And I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't feel natural, and sometimes it's
You're trying to tell them
useless.
what to do. Yeah.
But a lot of times I've found that when you throw things back in a person's lap, you know, that's horrible. You know, I can't imagine how hard that is. What do you think we should do? Or what do you think would help you?
Okay.
And the other night, I went and visited a family, a mom and her son. He's had a lot happen to him in his life, and he was the abusive one. And he was put through a lot. There was a PFA put out against him. He had to endure that court process and hear people talk about him. And he, no matter what I said, he just kept saying, well, I'm the victim. I am just a victim. Mom, aren't I a victim? Mom, I am a victim. Mom, I'm a victim. And so I said, hold on one second. I'm going to tell you my story. And it was sort of like his. And he goes, oh, wow, well, what did you do? And I said, I stopped thinking that I was a victim. And then when I walk around, and I just keep thinking, like, I am owed something. Nothing is my fault. I am a victim. You owe me your time on the phone after my therapist. I owed him coming out to visit his house with his mom. I owed that to him. And I said, there's nothing owed to you by anybody. Like, things have happened to me, and I mean, I did what I had to do to get through these things, but if I'm a victim forever, nothing will ever be accomplished in my life, and I'll be living with somebody on assistance, and you know, my life won't be what I want it to be. But if I have this empowerment, you know, focus, and that I've been through that, and I can do kind of whatever, not whatever, but I'm stronger because of what I've went through, instead of thinking I'm a victim. Like, I'm really strong. I'm a strong person. And so I told him, I said, what you have been through has made you a stronger person than most people. So use that, not your entitlement to things.
Right. Yeah, I didn't present it that way, but you're exactly right. That's what it came to be. Like, they're hearing so much that, okay, I have the right to feel the way I have to feel. Yes, we all do.
Yeah.
But you have to also say, well, when am I going to, you know, pick myself up and go and do what I have to do to be better?
And in my talking points that I do for One Woman's Hope, there's categories, and I say there's a victim, there's a survivor, and then there's a thriver. And you want to get, you know, some people get stuck in the victim, some people make it to a survivor, and then there are those of us that thrive. And that's really the ultimate goal, where you want to go.
I just want to say one thing. I have to leave, unfortunately, to go see another client in a different location. So I just want to speak for everybody that was here today and those of us that are left. Just thank you so much for being here, and all of you for your openness and your honesty and your sharing today, and all of the experiences that you shared with us, and all of the knowledge and information that you brought to us today. So I just want to thank everybody for being here. If you guys are open to it, if anyone else has any other questions, if you wanted to check in privately, but I just wanted to say thank you. I know I have to excuse myself, but we really, really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for
and
having
if you have
us.
your cards, I would definitely love to see
Yeah.